Hey everyone. So, this one has, of course, been on the list of topics from the very start. And for ACT50, it feels like the time to finally bring it out. So, here we are. We're going to talk about Earth 1 with special guest, George Shortfall. Now, we recorded this a few weeks ago. Back then, I thought it would be funny to, I don't know, parody other kind of debate podcasts with how I framed this discussion. And a few weeks ago, I even recorded an intro for this that sort of leaned into that a little bit more. Now, in the last week, world events have gone as they've gone, and feeling as I do now, and listening back to that intro recorded, with how things have happened, it doesn't really sound funny anymore to my ears. Hearing that kind of jokey intro. So here I am recording another one. The episode itself, I maybe make a few jokes about that kind of debate, hot debate thing. Which, maybe if I listen now with my mid-November mindset, it might make me cringe a little bit. But to be clear, this is an honest discussion about a favour tile, just a little part of Terra Mystica that makes it, it's one of the things that makes it such a fantastic game, such an interesting game, and makes it worth spending hours both on the internet and increasingly now in real life discussing it and doing tournaments and doing streams and doing videos and doing conversations like this. So yeah, Earth 1, very interesting topic that we're going to talk about. Right now, it feels like a great time to say that I love you all. I love being a part of this group of different people from different backgrounds all around the world who can come together with this game in common. And if you've been tempted to listen here for the first time by the big controversial clickbaity Terra Mystica topic, if you've been tempted for the first time, we've made a lot of these now and I am quite proud of them. So I would encourage you to also listen to this and then also have a browse on Spotify, on other podcast apps, back through the back catalogue and give them a listen. So here we go. It's Earth 1. Thank you, everyone. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. Nice to talk.
Yeah.
So this is, I'll have probably given this like a sort of quite clickbaity, like Earth 1 versus Water 2, or like pro player demolishes Earth 1 noob, like thumbnail or something. But I wanted to have a serious conversation about the big topic, the big Terra Mystica topic of Earth 1, because partly I think maybe the discussion kind of goes around, but like I think some of the context gets lost to a lot of the discussion, and then I everyone wants to like clarify things, and partly this just like adds to the confusion. But I wanted to kind of have a clear discussion about the whole topic rather than just like bits and pieces in a way. And we kind of agreed that I am like, to be like the devil's advocate, I am for Earth 1. I'm like bigging up this amazing favor tile, which is kind of true. I think I'm more bullish about it than most people, perhaps. And you are perhaps the anti, the con, the sort of you've moved on from that. But I think as well, like we said, you are willing to kind of speak impartially in some sense about the topic as well.
Yeah, um I think I should be able to separate my personal bias from my general thoughts on it, but I can definitely speak to both sides, I think, as needed.
Yeah, nice. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about a few kind of like a bit of the background initially, perhaps,
Mm.
of it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Um, and I'll do that by saying, yeah, so like some of the history, and then also, first of all, George, what is Earth One?
Well, Earth One is one of the favor tiles in this board game, Terra Mystica, that we all play and love and obsess over. And yeah, so every time you build a temple or a sanctuary, or if you're Orin and you build your stronghold, then you get to choose one of the various favor tiles in the game. And so Earth One is we name it that because it specifically moves you up one step on the Earth cult when you take it. And then the bonus uh, from taking that favor tile is that after that, every successive dwelling that you build on the board will score you 2 victory points.
Yeah, which is an excellent explanation, and that is partly, I think, like a lot of these things, I do want to include uh, kind of more beginner players in this conversation. So I like explaining it from first principles. And the other thing I wanted to add is that you will sometimes see it referred to as FAV 11, FAV 11, because
Mm-hmm.
of Snellman notation being, yeah, it's the 11th favor tile on Snellman notation. Which I prefer. I prefer to use Earth One for clarity. But yeah, if you see Fav 11, especially on old strategy stuff on like Board Game Geek, they're talking about Earth One. First, let me ask you, is it good, George?
Is Earth One good?
Is it a good favor tile?
Uh, yes, it is. I think that most people would agree that it is, if not the best, it is one of the best. Simply because, again, it scores you victory points for building dwellings, and throughout the game, everyone is going to build, a decent number of dwellings. In some games, it might only be a few, in which case it's maybe not quite as good, but um, you do build a lot of dwellings.
Why it's so good is you're getting points for doing the best thing in Terra Mystica, which is building dwellings. That is,
Mhm.
dwellings are brilliant for economy. They score you, if you win network at the end of the game, they score you loads of points. They're like, building dwellings is just the most fantastic thing it's possible to do in the game, and you get points for doing it. And that is just utterly excellent.
Yeah, agreed.
So, some of the history about it is because so in like metas past of the game, because it's so strong, it was viewed as being basically essential if you wanted to win in a higher level table, right, in kind of years past.
Yeah, yeah, and part of the reason why we talk about it so much, I think, and again, if you're new to Terra Mystica, like most people play as a 4-player game, and regardless of the number of players you play with, there are always 3 copies of each favor tile. So that means in a 4-player game, there's going to be at least one person who doesn't get Earth One. Um, and so, yeah, early on in Terra Mystica's history, like you said, it was seen as very important to have, and so, one person would always be missing out on Earth One, and that was kind of seen as a big handicap compared to the rest of the players.
And this is where the term rushing Earth One kind of came to be. One thing, like, yeah, like setting up the discussion, I wanted to ask is, what do you regard as, in quotations, rushing Earth One to mean? Because I think sometimes it can, like, there are sort of different definitions about what that means.
Yeah, for sure. I think yeah, sometimes it's used kind of as this global term with people having different uh, interpretations of that. For myself, and I think this goes back to the original or early days of Terra Mystica, where these Earth One rushes would happen, and this is again primarily on Snellman, and so the first three players would be the ones who would get Earth One. Um, so each player would build a trading house, and then the first three players would all build a temple on their second action and take Earth One, meaning that the fourth player at the table just never had a chance to get it. He was always going to miss out on it because the other players were all rushing it. So that's what I tend to think of as an Earth One rush, is when you spend your first two actions of the game building a trading house and then a temple to take Earth One.
Taking one as your first favor tile is a thing, but
Mhm.
for a rush, for me, it kind of has to be like you are doing it with your like very first actions.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely how I feel. I think, um, yeah, I think of it as, okay, I'm going to take this. I'm going to make sure I get it. Like, there's no possible way I'm not getting it. Um, type of plan or strategy.
And I think like this is something that is so amazing about kind of metas and games. It's important to stress that in in Snellman days past, and to some extent still on Snellman, but also when Terra Mystica first came to board game arena, I think as well. Correct me if
Mhm.
I'm wrong, but it was that was what everybody did in almost every game all of the time, unless you had, you've got like factions like giants and swarmlings and stuff who maybe don't build a temple. But for a lot of games, every like the first three players in first three seats would build a temple with their first action, take Earth One, and that was just what everyone did. And metas change in other games, like I used to play a lot of Overwatch, and the meta would change, but a lot of the time that would change because something had changed in like the rules of the game or the character strengths, and nothing has changed in Terra Mystica really since those days. But we're now in a sort of a different world, a different meta, but that is what happened all the time, and it's quite kind of interesting to think about that.
Yeah, for sure. And like you alluded to, on Snellman, there is still that is still a like a meta that does exist, and not to the same extent that it did, like 10 years ago, but it's still quite, um, or I guess it's not uncommon to see an Earth One rush on Snellman, whereas on Board Game Arena it would be a little bit more of an uncommon thing now.
The history kind of went. I remember like you would see a few people saying like, um, I think that maybe getting double dig, like if you have the option to take the double dig action in the first round to forgo Earth One, it might be like that might be a better option. And it was like really tentative people saying like it might be better. Um,
Yeah.
would you say now, for example, that if you are offered to take, if you have the power to take the double dig action first, it is worth prioritizing that over Earth One? Would you say that nowadays?
Yeah, 100%. And again, part of that might be my personal preference or bias, but um, I think it's fairly well accepted, um, that the double spade action is very important, especially early in the game, like round one, round two, just because again, getting out more dwellings is very important for your economy, for being able to do more stuff throughout the game. So yeah, I would say that even as a newer player, if you get the option to take the double spade power action, you should, in almost all cases, take it in round one.
Mm. again, this is more history, but then yeah, so like, and I don't know, I can't remember the ordering of all this, but yeah, people were like, okay, maybe you should take Double Dig instead of rushing Earth One, and you might still get Earth One. I also remember people
Mhm.
being like, hey guys, you don't have to rush it if giants are in the game. And people, and that was like a tip. Um,
Right.
Zoras also made a video, which is like the title. I'll link it in this, but it was basically like, is it possible to win Terra Mystica if you don't get Earth One? Was basically like Zoras made a whole video about it, and
Yeah.
he kind of came to the conclusion of like, yes, it is possible to do that. Here are like some ways. Um, I guess that probably came out in 2020, I think. And then Ryan Ranior was a big was sort of like leading the charge of it, where he made an account called Earth One is for chumps, and
Mhm.
he would play with that account and pointedly refuse to take Earth One, refuse to even take it at all, I think was the rule of that account.
Yeah, he would just, yeah, he wouldn't take it ever. Um, which, yeah, kind of I think did a lot to popularize um the the shunning of Earth One, and then yeah, because of his name of his account, of course, is where you will hear the phrase that someone is being a chump or is chumping. Um, so yeah, the to chump would be to take Earth One, um, which again, in some cases, I would argue is not actually being a chump, but it is kind of grown um, beyond what the initial kind of premise was, I think.
Yeah, and I wanted to, I guess that is sort of the history, is like some people started experimenting with it, and now we're at a point where I think the majority of high level players would probably argue that it's not the strongest move in a lot of cases to take it as your first favor tile, even certainly not
Mhm.
to rush it at the expense of other things. But I did want to like with that kind of chumping thing. Personally, I at this point I don't love the term and kind of how it can be used in a bit of a like a bit of a negative kind of um what's the word? Kind of almost belittling way in some cases. Um I think you can play the game however you want, and if you personally think that doing a move is the best move, um it do that move. And it the kind of like Earth One is for chumps came at a time when it was like anti-establishment to like go on this different way. So like chump used to be like punching up almost. It was like an anti-establishment joke. And now I
Yeah.
think because a lot of people don't do it, it almost becomes it's almost like punching down a bit, and like it can be a bit critical of like, oh, you did this kind of um like boring, like bad, good, bad, or whatever. But like this, and it gets viewed as like a boring way to score points as well. And people should be clear that they can play the game however they want. The cool thing is to win and enjoy Terra Mystica. It doesn't matter if you play in a cool way or not.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, um, yeah, if you watch any Terra Mystica streams that are out there, you'll often see comments about that. If someone does take Earth One, especially early in the game, like as their first favor, for example, you will see, yeah, the comments will pop in like, "Oh, look at this chump," or things like that. And yeah, I agree. I don't think that that is really helpful anymore um, to the community. And I do agree that I think it comes from often a derogatory um, or it comes off as derogatory, and I think that we as a community should be trying to phase that out of our commentary. I think because yeah, it's not very helpful. It doesn't offer anything to the discussion, and I think it can be um, a hindrance to newer players who are kind of in that exploratory phase where they're trying out different things or they're still not sure. how to play without Earth One, how to score enough without it, or things like that. So yeah, I would like to see the chump term kind of you know, taken out of our lexicon.
Which, yeah, is not to, like, to be clear, is not to criticize Raniel, because
No.
because it was a very different time when he made that, and I screenshotted his, like, a post he put, which said, "It seems wild in this area where so many of us eschew Earth One that there was a period in the game's history where many felt you had to get Earth One or you were screwed. My ult
Mhm.
was to combat that and prove you could do well by ignoring Earth One, and I ran into issues where players knew that and made it hard to bid on alchemists or certain games plans. As for the discussion here, I agree too many of us default to economy favors and VP from other sources. But there is a reason for the default for a while was Rush Earth One. It's pretty good." um, so yeah, he kind of agrees. I think that it was like a different time when he kind of
Mhm.
made that kind of and it was like fun. I remember it being really fun to see him like try different things, and yeah, that's what's fantastic about all of this. And now it does feel like Nerdcube said it as well. It seems silly to use the term now because we're likely in a meta where many players don't take Earth One often enough, perhaps. So there we go. Um, that is, I think that's like the kind of the background and the history, and now we are either going to close the history with this discussion and everything is going to be solved, or we're just going to add fuel to the fire with our hot debate that we're about to have. And we're going to take each other down with our differing opinion.
Right on.
So, and again, I've spoken a lot here, but my kind of reason for doing this is I think some things do kind of get a little bit missed from the discussion a little bit. And I actually personally have some questions which I don't fully understand about it, being maybe slightly on like a bit of a lower level than the real experts of the game. So I had some things that I kind of wanted um to like discuss about it. And get your opinion on them, and I will prove you wrong at the end of the day.
Okay, sounds good.
So, point one was that it is good. It is a good favor tile, right? Like we've already kind of said that, but it is if you take it at some point in Terra Mystica, it's probably going to be a good thing to have done in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, but like you had said, that yeah, building dwellings is kind of the main part of Terra Mystica. It's the way you build your economy the best is by building dwellings, which gives you additional worker income throughout the rest of the game. Um, in order to score points on network, you have to have built, more dwellings than the other players at the table. Um, and so yeah, it's just building dwellings is something that, for the majority of strategies players are doing throughout the game. And so, yeah, if you're able to additionally score points while you're doing that, that is pretty good. Like that's going to help you out points wise for sure.
And that's where, like, to kind of talk about actual strategy a little bit, um, maybe you don't take it as your first favorite tile if you're kind of playing differently, but a lot of the time, even you, sir, will often take it later in the game. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, definitely. I, I think there's a funny thing that happened um, at some point where, yeah, we all agreed, okay, rushing Earth One isn't, the best thing, and so, um, but we all still agree that it is good to have at some point, and so you'll see in a lot of higher level tables these days, people building a temple in round one and taking their preferred econ favor tile. Um, and then there'll be this point where they're all trying to either build a sanctuary or a second temple in round two. in order to make sure that they get Earth 1. And I think it's a funny thing that has happened because there's no longer usually a rush for Earth 1 in round 1, but sometimes there can be in round 2, which I think is really hilarious.
Yeah, and you talked about that with when you did your strategy session at Terra Mystica last year.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like trying to be cool, but then like running back home to mummy in round 2 once you've like
Yeah.
shown how you stayed out late, you're like really cool and you had a beer, but then you're like,
Yeah, and I fall into this I do this a lot myself. And because yeah, we all know that it is in most games, in most um, strategies that we're playing, um, in most cases we would rather have Earth One than not. And so um, the way the meta is now, after all that history that we kind of discussed, is yeah, most people are not taking it in round 1. But then because most players still want to take it at some point during the game, then they're often, rushing to get it in round 2 or 3. And so yeah, there is still in most games all 3 copies will be taken and still early-ish in the game.
and again, this is partly what you talked about in that strategy session. What would building a temple as your first like kind of upgrade path in Terra Mystica is generally pretty good because early priests are great. You get to take a
Mhm.
favor, you get more leech. Something you talked about in that session was that then if you do that, but then in as your next kind of upgrade, you build another temple with your your maybe your one remaining dwelling on the board or something, that can actually be quite destructive to your economy because then suddenly all you've got really is 2 temples on the board. Um, is there an argument that if you think if your game plan is almost to build a temple round 1 and take fire 1, and then build a temple round 2 because you really want to take earth 1, is almost it just better to kind of build that temple round 1, take earth 1, and then build a load of dwellings in round 2 or something like that? Is there kind of something to that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, and again, some of this stuff that I say I don't actually follow, which is kind of funny. Because like I mentioned, I do often tend to fall into this, you know, building a second temple for Earth One in round 2 or 3. Um, but yeah, I do think because we talked about like dwellings are, the best way to build your economy is building lots of dwellings. And so yeah, I definitely think there are a lot of games where it would just make more sense to, okay, if you want Earth One, just take it in round 1, that's fine. And then over round 2 and 3, you're just building a lot of dwellings, which is going to actually give you a lot of economy, and you're also scoring those Earth One points for all of those dwellings that you're building. And I think that there can definitely be winning game plans with that strategy, and we do see that today. Like there's still top level players doing that at times. And like you had mentioned earlier about, some players like Nerdcube have said that, maybe I think we probably don't do that enough. We've kind of swung too far in the other direction. Um, but yeah, I definitely think, like, if you think about it, building a temple, so upgrading to a trading house and then a temple costs you 4 workers. It also removes a dwelling from the board, so that removes a worker production. So in a sense, it's kind of costing you 5 workers, and sure, you get another priest back, which are good, but not to mention the coin investment in those. Um, Whereas even if you just, if you're able to hard dig out a dwelling, and build an additional dwelling, like you've spent basically the same number of workers, but you actually have a greater worker income throughout the rest of the game. And so I think economy wise, that can often be better than building a second temple.
And this all kind of what you're talking about kind of talks a bit to my, like, this isn't an argument for it, but I think was my like extra point, and I think it sometimes gets missed is it wasn't like back in the day everyone thought that the absolute strongest move they could do was to build a trading house and then build a temple and take Earth One. It's it's just that if you know you want it and you know everyone else wants it, you have to rush it. Like, and that's
Mhm.
the kind of the game theory aspect of all of this that I think sometimes we kind of forget. And it's really interesting because that's what makes Terra Mystica such a brilliant game, is that there are only 3 copies of each favor tile, so there's a chance you'll miss out. Um, and I don't really have a point to make here, but just that I think sometimes we kind of forget that aspect of it, that it's not like if you're rushing Earth One, you're saying like, this is my strongest thing that I could possibly do. It's just that, like, if you know you definitely want it, you have to secure it at some point, and that always happened first of all.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and especially in certain tables with certain matchups, like um, it is something where yeah, like you'll see sometimes like a Swarmlings player uh, take Earth One in round one or round two, and sometimes some of the other players are like, wait, why did you take Earth One? You're not going to be building as many dwellings as the rest of us, and it's kind of like, well, sure, but now one of you doesn't get it, um, which even if I'm only scoring, I don't know, 10 points, 12 points with Earth One, that's probably going to be equivalent to an Air One favor later in the game, and I'm taking away 16 to 20 points from one of you, which is going to be good for me as well.
Yeah, and I think that's like a legit like strength of taking Earth One. Yeah, like you say, even if
Mhm.
you're Swarmlings, you're taking it away from the table, and that's what is kind of so interesting. And I do think that gets missed a little bit in the argument of like why it's good to take it is, you've got it and it
Mhm.
is good, but you know that no one else, or like someone else, is going to miss it as a result.
Yeah, for sure.
But just like, so now to kind of talk broadly, it like all of this depends on the setup. But if you, let me try and word this question correctly. In general, yeah, just to like be clear about this, even if you see that it's a game where you probably want to take Earth One at some point in the game, but you see that the other players are like, if you knew that they were going to rush it, if they all said to you like, hey George, I'm going to rush Earth One at this start of this game, and you can choose to or not take it with your very first move of the game, um in general, would you say you still prefer to take an economic favor tile first of all?
Yes. There's some exceptions, which I think we'll probably talk about, but for myself, I've gotten because I've been playing that way for the last number of years. I'm totally comfortable in most situations, just not taking it. Like if I know that the other players are all taking it in round one, I'm usually totally fine with that, and I'll be able to play and adjust my game plan um, to manage without it. And yeah, there's almost always I will just take an econ favor in that case.
Because you're so cool.
Yeah, exactly. I'm cooler than all of you. Um, no,
Well,
I don't know. That's how I prefer to play.
you might be cool, but you're wrong, because point two. I'm going to hit you with point two because we're going quite long now. We need to get to my killer points. Point two: expert players can skip Earth One. You guys who are, 700, 800, 900 elo, fine, you can do it. And you'll like come up with some strategy where you use the coins from Fire One to like clear the board and build 4 towns and like score 10 points around from everything, and great. But for kind of medium to lower level players, we can't do that. Like it's really hard to score points in Terra Mystica. And therefore, if you are a kind of like more medium level player, it is the best thing to just take Earth One at the very start of the game. And then every dwelling you score for the rest of the game is going to score you points. And that is your best way to score points. What do you think of that?
Yeah, again, I think the beauty of Terra Mystica is that there are many different ways to score points. And so, yes, Earth 1, scoring points for all your dwellings, is a very valid way to score points. Um, and it is a legit way that you can win the game by taking it in round 1 and going about your game plan. Now, the I guess the way to okay, if you're trying to get better at Terra Mystica,
Mm,
I think early on, sure. I think if your goal is to win games and increase your elo, things like that, I think yes, taking Earth One, because it is a very easy way to score points. Like we said, we want to build dwellings. Scoring points for these dwellings is just it's a very valid and you know legit way to score points in Terra Mystica. So I think that's totally fine. Um, and like you kind of alluded to, at some point, your ceiling might be capped if that's your only strategy. Um, because in some games, you might be able to score more if you do other things. And so at some point, you'll probably have to try out different things where you're maybe not taking Earth One in round one. Maybe you're getting it later in the game, or maybe you're not taking it at all, but you're trying out other strategies. Um, and yeah, I think in order to improve overall as a Terra Mystica player, you will have to, explore and try out other strategies, and figure out for yourself, what is what is your favorite way to play, what is your, most consistent way to play. And for some people, that is still just taking Earth One in round 1 or 2. Um, and that's totally fine. But it's at some point you will need to kind of try different things just to deepen your understanding of Terra Mystica, I think.
yeah, and because I'm like saying this point somewhat tongue like I'm devil's advocating it a little bit, but I do
Yeah.
honestly find myself personally like I will have a game where I get to the end, like I get to round 5 and 6. I'm like, I'm not really scoring any points, and I didn't take Earth One, and I'm kind of sad that I don't have it. And I do find like, oh, this hasn't really worked. But I think, like you say, if you want to push into those like expert levels, say like 500 plus elo or whatever, you maybe do have to kind of um try and yeah do those different things and try and achieve more with your game, because to reach those higher levels you're kind of going to have to score more points throughout the whole game, and at higher levels a lot of players will be doing that by having higher economies and sort of competing on a, I don't want to say like a higher level, but like a kind of higher economic level in a way, perhaps.
Mhm. Yeah, and I definitely have my own games where I yeah get to the end and yeah I just haven't scored enough points, and it would have been nice to have Earth One at some point. Um, but yeah, I think that in some games if you take it early, and especially in the current meta, as we kind of mentioned, where people aren't often taking it in round one, you can kind of get away with, not taking it right away. And that's kind of what everyone is doing. And that's why we're all kind of successful at it. It's because we're all kind of doing the same thing, right? Um, so yeah, I think in the current meta, you can definitely learn to play without it at the beginning of the game and trying to find a way to, or how you're able to get it later in the game to maximize your economy and points and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that is like a kind of a salient piece of advice, I guess, to those kind of like medium level players who want to achieve more is maybe that's where you want to look at the track. And if you see that the scoring track for the game is like round 6 big buildings and round 5 temple, and you're like, oh, I'm not really got a good plan for how I'm going to score a lot of points at the end of that game. Maybe in that game you want to say, no, I am going to kind of stick to what I know, take Earth 1, and that will be the way I score points at the end of the game. But if you see a track where it's like high scoring end game, you got like town scoring at the end of the game and dwelling scoring, and there's like other ways that you can clearly see like, oh, I'm going to be able to get a lot of points from that. That's where you might go, hey, I'm going to take a favor tile and have that higher level of economy at the end of the game that I can hit the track or hit the bonus tiles much harder.
Yeah, for sure.
Point two, I think I won that one. I think I was right.
I'll give you that.
Point three. What was point one? Oh yeah, point one is just that it was good. Point three. Um, one thing that again I kind of like I see, and I don't I sort of understand this, but I want to like hear you talk about this is um what one thing people would say is like, okay, don't take Earth One. What you're going to do instead is you're going to take an I can't say this word today, an econ favor tile.
Yeah.
So you're going to take Earth 2 and you're going to get a worker from it, and that worker is going to compound interest at 1.45x per round or whatever Zoras worked out back in the day that the internal interest rate of Terra Mystica is. And by the end of the game, that means you're definitely going to win network, and it's going to be worth 18 points at the end of the game because you're going to win network, and those are swingy points. You're taking those points away from the other player. So your game plan is like, okay, you're not taking Earth 1, you're going to take an economic favor tile, and you're going to win network. That's all good. But this is genuinely true, is I will kind of go into a game with that game plan. But then in the final round, I'm like, okay, I've got to win network. But say it's like a big building scoring round, and I don't have Earth 1. And then you're building dwellings that kind of like don't score you points in sort of like the hope of winning network. And I get to this point where I'm like, maybe I'm not winning network, and it's all kind of gone wrong, and now I don't have any way to score points, and I do sometimes then find myself just like upgrading digs for 6 points or something, and it's like, oh, this now feels terrible because I'm not scoring any points in the last round. What do you think about that kind of thing of like, you don't take Earth 1 because you win network and that compensates? What's your opinion on that point?
Yeah, um, I think especially as a player who's trying to improve, you need to try and look at um, the setup as a whole for each game. And I think we kind of alluded to that, but you look at the scoring track, the round scoring tiles, and you see, okay, are there ways to score points later in the game? Are there usually that means, yeah, town scoring, dwelling scoring, trading house scoring. Those are kind of the more higher scoring late game um, round tiles. Or is it the temples and stronghold or sanctuary scoring? Those are typically for most factions lower scoring. So look at that kind of rounds 4 to 6 and see, okay, are there you know uh, is there more potential to score late in the game? You also want to look at the bonus cards. So, the bonuses that you take for each round. Are there scoring ones in there? There's four of them that can be in the game, right? The stronghold sanctuary, the trading house, the dwelling, and the ship scoring. So, are there ways to score points for having stuff built throughout the game by taking these bonus cards? Um, and so looking at those two things can kind of tell you, okay, is there a chance to score more this game or less? And so if it's a point where, okay, maybe I won't be able to score as much, then Earth One definitely becomes more viable and potentially more important to have. And I definitely agree that there are games where I've not taken Earth One and it is round 6, and yeah, I don't have a lot of ways to score points. Um, and in those situations, like upgrading, I think I always like to try and use proper terminology. Upgrading on the exchange track, I think it's called. Um, upgrading digs, what we all kind of say it is a viable way to score points. If you do that twice, that's 12 points, right? So that is a real way to score points later in the game, if you do have the economy for that, but not other ways to score. Um, but yeah, I think I would agree with you that there are certain games where, yeah, you just kind of run out of ways to score. And in those situations, it's probably a good idea to see if you can get Earth One if you think that that's going to be a problem.
Mm. This is something that because I'm a bit rusty. Like I'm genuinely now coming at this from the point of I'm not as good as I used to be, and one thing I've kind
Mm.
of lost the knack for doing is having a game plan for the game, perhaps. And
Mm.
so that is where I need to think more. It's not as simplistic as saying I'm gonna take an econ favor tile and win network. I just need to. It's what you're saying. It's about having like an entire game plan, and I personally do need to get better at that.
Yeah, I think that's a real way to improve at Terra Mystica is starting to kind of look at, and this is probably easier in like a turn-based game, um, obviously than a live game, but kind of looking at the game at the start and seeing, okay, how am I going to score points? Because that's how you win at Terra Mystica, right? It's not necessarily whoever builds the most stuff or that kind of thing. It's you have to score the most points. And so yeah, you need to try and kind of look at see how am I going to score points this game. And Earth One is a way to score points in Terra Mystica. And so looking at it and seeing, okay, do I think I can not take Earth One? Or I'm okay if I don't get Earth One, and how am I going to score points then? And like you said, network is a big one. There's obviously the cults. Um, there's the bonus cards and the round scoring. So, um, and this is something that I don't even always think about, and I just kind of wing it. But yeah, it is important to try and look at each game and see, okay, how am I going to score points this game?
Yeah, and yeah, I think, and this kind of like point three of don't take Earth One, win network instead, also comes from back from the time when the meta was everyone took it, and it was like, oh, if you didn't take it, you're going to have a better economy than everyone else. Whereas now the meta is different, and it's, you know, you're not going to be the only one taking an econ favorite tile, perhaps. But
Correct.
it's speaking more to the thing of like there is an opportunity cost to taking it, and instead you could be getting something like Fire One, which gives you 3 coins every single round, or Earth Two, which gives you a worker every single round, and that is what you are. That's the opportunity cost of taking it, is you're missing out on that option for better economy.
Yeah, yeah, and definitely, yeah, like you said, in the current meta where most players aren't taking Earth One as their first favor, Some aren't even taking it at all. That yeah, they're you could get into a situation where, okay, I've kind of not taken Earth 1 because I'm kind of anticipating I'm going to have this good economy. I'm going to be able to win network and score all these other points. But then all of a sudden, someone else also had that same game plan, but they were able to do it a little bit better than you. And so, yeah, you aren't scoring as many network points as you were hoping to. And yeah, then you haven't been scoring those Earth 1 points that you just would have had by doing what you were doing all game.
Is that where there's a little bit of a thing of like going kind of having the opposite game plan to the other three players of the table is a good strong thing to do, because then you've got like opportunity to score, and that's why like say like the mermaids shipping, like scoring mermaid shipping points can be really good sometimes because other people don't want that ship scoring tile, so it can be really strong if you're the only one taking it, say. Is that where like, yeah, if the whole world is like, oh, I'm never taking Earth One, and say like the meta had been built totally differently, it might be actually stronger to kind of go the other way and be the one player that does take it really early, and like I don't know, like give up on network, say, and just say no, I'm like I'm scoring from Earth One instead. Is there anything to that it's like go against what everyone else is doing, and that might actually now be people aren't taking it enough, so take it earlier and score? Is there anything to that?
I think so. Like, yeah, I definitely if you're in a game where you know, for example, you're probably not going to score network points, like you're not going to be able to connect based on the start of the game, the starting placements. You're just looking at it, you're like, okay, I'm probably not going to be able to connect. Even if I did, I might only score 6 network points. Um, then definitely Earth One becomes more viable, right? Because you want to be able to score enough points to try and have a chance to win. And and yeah, definitely, yeah, situation like you said, if everyone else is kind of rushing econ, um, I think we should try and get that into the Terra Mystica vocabulary, rushing econ.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
if everyone is rushing econ and you see this opportunity, okay, I'm just gonna take Earth One. I'm gonna find enough econ in other ways. I might be able to get enough coin actions, or um, I'm taking, a coin town in the early part of the game or things like that. And I'm just going to be able to get enough that way to build enough dwellings to score lots of points from Earth One. I think that can definitely be a viable thing.
Okay, yeah, this is interesting. Point three, I think we split the points on that. That's a tie.
Okay.
Point four, and this is something that I genuinely find very interesting. And yeah, you have probably a good perspective on this because you play still a lot of Snellman. I think I don't know. I like dip in and out. The meta on the TM Tour Snellman tournament on the other website that people play, turn-based Terra Mystica, that has existed for a long, long time and keeps going and is a brilliant website. The meta on there is much more biased towards good old-fashioned traditional Earth One rushes, even in like the high levels of TM Tour, even in Division One. There are still people doing good old Earth One rushes. They're still doing it, and they're the best players on that website. What is up with that? Are they wrong? It's not like people who play on BGA. Some people have like gone back into Snellman, and they've not like won easily. Like it's still a high level tournament there. It's not like this like whole BGA world is now way better if they go and play on Snellman. What is up with that? What explain that to me?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I've been playing Snellman, um, yeah, consistently for the last few years. Um, and yeah, I was able to win a couple of times Div 1, but for the last few seasons I've been in Div 2 and I haven't been able to get promoted to Div 1. So it's not It's not like it's just all of a sudden this, um, as someone who prefers econ to Earth One, it's not something where automatically I have this incredible advantage over everyone. And I think part of that is still just the meta, where if most people are taking Earth One, again, as someone who prefers to take econ at the start, I'm not at, or I don't have the option to take Earth One at some point later in the game. So that's one thing. Um, I think a big part of it is because of the nature of TM Tour. It's you pick in turn order, so there's no auction in those games. So basically, the first player gets to their first pick of which faction they want, and so in most cases that ends up being cultists or darklings. And then the second player has their choice, and then they might take whichever one the first player didn't take of cultists and darklings. And then the third player takes, whoever, and then engineers say, and then the fourth player is kind of in the situation where they don't really have a good choice most of the time for picking a faction and having a chance to win the game. And so in that kind of world, I think Earth One does become a little bit more important just because in a lot of these matchups, your ceiling for some of these other point opportunities might be capped just based on the matchups. And so getting Earth One is a way to score points. Whereas if you don't take it and get taken economic favor, you might not just have the opportunity to score enough points just based on the matchup itself. So I do think in Snellman, because of the format, that lends itself to Earth One a bit more, and the meta is just still that way. So it is just, I think those are probably the two reasons why it's still very viable and very good.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And yeah, so maybe I'm genuinely finding this interesting to think about, and I can't quite wrap my head around it fully. But yeah, it's that thing of like it's the meta, it's we're in this world on like BGA playing where you don't need to rush it, and that means how do I explain this? It's like you don't need to rush it, which means you don't need to rush it. But
Yeah.
but if
Yeah.
you if it's being rushed, you have to rush it, and that's like the prisoner's dilemma thing, which I think we kind of is so interesting, and I think is what I want to talk more. I don't know. Yeah, that's what I find so interesting about it.
Mhm.
So yeah, like in your experience, like you were saying, playing TM Tour in recent um seasons, do you find like the rushing econ works for you, or do you find like how tempted are you to go for the good old Earth One rush when you're in a TM Tour game nowadays?
Um, well, I still don't. Um, and part of it is probably just stubbornness. Um, but I, yeah, I don't take Earth One in round one, except with certain factions, which I think we'll talk about later on. But if so personally, I just don't take it in almost all cases, and so that I have noticed recently, like there are other players who do also um, have kind of changed a little bit, and maybe it's because they're in a game with me and they've noticed that I just don't take it, and so then like we were mentioning, they realize, oh, I don't have to take it right away. Um, but yeah, it's something where I've had success doing this, but I've also had less success doing it. So it's hard to know.
Hmm. One thing, like because I think I didn't play TM Tour for a while, and then I went back, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm cool now. I'm not gonna do it. And then I did have it. It kind of goes back to point two. I did have a lot of games where I was like, I don't have Earth One, and I feel really bad. And then I think I played a season where I was like, I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna rush it like everyone else. And then I had it for the rest of the game, and it felt so good. It was like it just felt great to be able to score points for building dwellings. It was like glorious.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. I personally have just I think a lot of this comes down to enjoyment for myself. I think I enjoy building more stuff. I just find that more fun. And so you can usually build more stuff if you're taking more economic options early in the game. So not taking Earth One, taking an economic favor, or not even taking a favor and doing a dwelling rush or other things like that. And then obviously you're building a temple later in the game, so you're probably not getting Earth One, or you might not even want Earth One at that point because you've already built a lot of dwellings, and so it won't even be worth as many points at that point. Um, so yeah, for myself, I just find that more fun and enjoyable, and so there's situations where I probably do that to my benefit, and other times where it's to my detriment. So I think for yourself, like whoever's playing, um, uh, find that way that you enjoy Terra Mystica the most, I think, and play that way. And so that does encourage that kind of experimentation of, okay, when I'll play some games where I take it early, I'll play some games where I don't take it early, but maybe I take it in the mid game, some games where I don't take it at all. And I think, yeah, finding out what is both the most enjoyable way to play and gives you the most success is what I would kind of end up encouraging you to um, continue with, I guess.
I'm just kind of looking at. I was just having a look at some of the Snellman games of like the recent season in Division One and Division Two, and there are fewer full on Earth One rushes, like proper rushes, than maybe you used to see. So maybe
Yeah,
it is changing a little bit. But like you
yeah,
said, that partly could just be a meta thing. Um, something you said there, which is very interesting, is maybe people see you're in the game, and like one thing it used to be was you would see swarmlings in a game or
mhm,
giants, and then it would be like, okay, guys, we don't have to rush it. Like
yeah,
we've so maybe now there's something where you see George Shortfall in a game, and you're like, oh, we're good. I don't have to rush it.
yeah,
Um, or like when Ryan was saying when he was playing Earth One is for Trump's account,
mhm.
which makes me think I want to make an account called like I always rush Earth One or something. And I think this would be really interesting to do. Is like, do you then suddenly see like, a load more Earth One rushes because and you signaling like, no, I'm gonna take it, and then everyone goes, okay, I have to take it. Like if this guy's in fourth seat, I have to do it. I don't know if anyone's ever tried that.
Yeah, I don't know. I do think you would see more players take it. Because like I said, even in the current meta on Board Game Arena, where we're not we're not rushing it, or most of the time we're not even taking it in round one, there is still often a quote unquote rush for it, and often that is in round two. Um, and so yeah, I think because yeah, the thing we think about a lot, or that we're told is um, one of the factions. I think we'll get into factions right away, but I'll just say, like, if you think I really need Earth One, and my plan is I'm going to build, a temple round one, a sanctuary round two, or I'm building a temple round one, a temple round two. Like, is it that much worse, or is it possibly? How should I say? Is Could it possibly just be better to take Earth One in round one and take an Econ in round two, right? Because you're guaranteeing yourself to get Earth One, and then okay, you miss out on the 3 coins or the 1 work or 1 power or 4 power from the Econ in round one, but I have Earth One, and so I'm scoring points for all my dwellings, as opposed to okay, I'm going to take my econ favor in round 1 and hope to get Earth 1 in round 2, but if they're all gone, now what?
Yeah, this is where I think there's like maybe a bit more nuance to the whole thing that kind of gets thrown out a little bit in the kind of the like chumpy like I'm
Mm-hmm.
cool, you're not cool discussion that I think yeah is where maybe we're like missing a little bit of subtlety to all of this, which I'm liking to hear you talk about a little bit. So yeah, like you were saying, point five um was the factions and so again this is like back in the day um it was kind of like this was a thing you would hear where it's like okay maybe with some factions you don't need Earth One anymore because we now know that Darklings can score points by digging with their priests, and so they don't need Earth One. Fakirs can fly, so they don't need Earth One. Witches have got inherent scoring, so they don't need it. But then there were these factions where it's like, oh, with these factions though, they don't have any way to score points with the good economy they've got from their faction abilities. So you definitely need Earth One. So if you're playing alchemists, oh man, you 100% need Earth One. If you're playing nomads, you pretty damn well probably need it. And chaos magicians, like 100% you need it. What's your kind of view on that aspect of it now in this new fantastic meta where no one rushes it? Are there still factions where you um you still feel like you have to have it, or is that all gone out the window nowadays?
No, for myself, and again, I think other people would have different opinions on this, but for myself, the biggest one where I find myself taking Earth 1 in round 1, and potentially even rushing it, like with my first 2 actions, depending on the table and everything, would be Alchemist. That would be number 1 for me. Um, Now, other people have had success and have experimented with playing without it, and I've played without it myself. But I for my personal gameplay, I've found that Alchemist is the one that I want Earth One the most with. Um, with other factions, like you mentioned, like Nomads, um, I often do play without Earth One. Um, Chaos Magicians, I usually take Earth One. Um, and sometimes I will take it in round 1 with a temple, um, as one of the 2 favors that Chaos gets. So take Earth 1 and an Econ favor, and then in round 2 take the other couple Econ favors with a Sanctuary. Um, but yeah, Chaos I usually take Earth 1. Maybe not in round 1, but for sure out of the first 4 favors I'm usually taking Earth 1. Um, and then yeah, Alchemist. And I think, like you said, it's those are factions that are a bit more economic, and so they they have an inherent economic advantage already, and so taking Earth One is a good way to score points with that extra econ that they have. So that does make a lot of sense for them, I think.
Yeah, and so this is where it's all kind of yeah, it's not like it's all more nuanced, I think, is maybe like what I wanted to say. And the like your faction choice is another thing that you're throwing into the decision space along with are the bonus tiles scoring biased or econ biased? Are there good ways to score on the track? Like all of those things are, and you are including the faction choice in that decision of like, do I want to prioritize taking Earth One or not? And for you, maybe you're less likely to take it, even accounting for all of those things. But you are still thinking about the faction choice kind of in that decision.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think, yeah, I think the like I said, the biggest one is alchemists. That one pretty much always leads me to wanting Earth One. Um, and so I will often take that in round 1 if I'm building temples, or in round 2 if I've built my stronghold in round 1. Then I often will try and get Earth One in round 2 or maybe round 3 if I can. Um, then, like I said, Chaos, I usually want it as one of my first favor choices because they get two. They often have four favors early in the game. So I usually want Earth 1 as one of those four favors. Um, and then another one that I often find, and that's kind of goes counter to the factions with inherent scoring, is I usually am much more successful with Earth 1 with Darklings than without. Um, and I think a lot of this comes from my Snellman playing, um, and I think it comes down to the fact that usually on Snellman and on BGA, if you're playing Darklings on base map, you often are not scoring network points, or if you are, you're only scoring 6 network points, and so you're also not scoring a lot on the cults usually because you're not sending as many priests to the cults because priests give you points and they're a way to terraform hexes, and so you're scoring less network, less cults than other players, and so having that Earth 1 point uh, engine for all your dwellings is I find more important for Darklings than it may initially look. And so yeah, Darklings are one where again you usually want a sanctuary round 1 or round 2 if you can. And so I'm usually hoping to have Earth 1 out of those 2 favors.
Was it, yeah, and you get the synergy with the Earth track as well, which is another thing
Mhm.
which is so good about Earth One is the Earth track is often the best for cult rewards, and so like yeah, it's just the best favorite tile.
Yes.
I'm obviously want to stray into Flame War territory again, but you know, guys, I think we're getting him. We're getting to admit he secretly loves it. He pretends to be cool.
Yeah. No, I definitely do think um yeah, I do think for myself, I take it less than I should probably, but I'm okay with that.
On the factions, the other point that was like an interesting thing, I think, and you mentioned alchemists is one thing. I think this is in I think the Zoras Ultimate Guide to Alchemists talks about this. Is like the alchemist stronghold is really good I can't say that word economically, and it's quite a good one to open with in a lot of cases because you get a load of power. Although I think nowadays there's so much more leech going around that it used to be maybe that you could build the stronghold and that would give you enough power to take double dig or something. Nowadays, I'm not sure if that's the case, but it was always regarded as like alchemists need Earth One, so you have to kind of forgo this incredible stronghold
Mhm.
um, to build a temple instead. Also, because they like having priests. Where do you see that like the state of that nowadays? Are like would you open stronghold more often with alchemists nowadays because you're like freed of the restraint of needing to rush Earth One?
Yeah, I do I usually don't open stronghold with alchemists. Um, but I do if it's a round 1 big building scoring and I'm on the big building tile or bonus card, then I for sure would open stronghold in those cases. Um, I usually wouldn't unless I'm getting additional scoring from it in round 1. Um, and part of that is again just because Earth 1 is so good for them and priests are very good for them. Now, if you're playing on Board Game Arena in a landscapes game, then that also allows the stronghold to be a bit more viable to open with because their landscape can allow you to advance on the shipping and exchange track. Um, for without priest cost. So it can save you 1 or 2 priests that way. Um, but yeah, I do think I do tend to open temple with them still, but in some situations where I'm scoring a lot of points for building the stronghold, I will open stronghold for sure.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So that is the end of all of my points. And I came at you hard with my incredible arguments. and you were on the ropes there. I could hear it in your voice. You were struggling to come up with your counter arguments, but I think you repelled them well. And one thing, like you mentioned, landscapes there. We're not even. I don't. We could go into like Fire and Ice scoring and like fan factions and Fire and Ice factions, and we can't talk about all that now because those are factors
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, for sure.
Um,
There's so much.
because partly because I think this is like my point is like there's so much that's interesting just on base, and this is why I'm more like base Terra Mystica bias. Maybe is there's so much interesting that goes on with these things that we kind of get lost a little bit, and there's a lot of interesting stuff with this whole game theory thing that there are only 3 copies of every favorite tile, which make this discussion very interesting. So we've talked for a long time, and we should wrap it up. It's been I've like genuinely found it interesting to talk about all this stuff. It seems like the conclusion, if I'm going to draw a conclusion, is if you're an improving player who wants to like push into the higher levels of Terra Mystica, maybe don't feel bad if you do feel like you want to take Earth 1, but maybe like every now and then try like a more economic open and try not taking it and see how you go. And if you're an expert player who's at 700 elo and wants to like win the Terra Mystica World Open and win Arena, maybe try taking it more often and try and stop rushing econ and give it a go of taking it more often, because you might find some success with it.
Yeah, I would agree. I won't I won't agree. Well, I won't for myself take it more, or at least not at this point. But I do think that I should probably take it more. But maybe I'm just stubborn at this point. But yeah, I would agree. I would say that yes, to conclude, Earth 1 is good. In most games, having it might be better than not having it, but you don't necessarily need it. And I think you definitely don't need to rush it, but try and figure out if you need it or not. And if you do think you need it, then go and get it.
You're speaking carefully there, because I'm going to comb through everything you've said, and like there's going to be a quote for a thumbnail at some point that is
Oh
is like
yeah.
a speech bubble from you saying like Earth One is good, and it's going to get all the clicks.
Yeah, I fully expect that.
um cool. That was interesting. I think like we've probably not solved everything, but those are good conclusions. This was a really interesting chat. Thank you for um talking about it, and like thinking about these points and kind of giving like a um an impartial judgment on some of them. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I thanks for having me on. It was really fun. I love the podcast and love that you're still doing it. So it's really amazing, and we're very, as a community, very um, lucky that you've been doing this for so long. So big props to you.
Thanks, man. Cool. Well, we will speak soon. See you later.
Yeah, see you around.
Cheers.